Hey guys, welcome to the workshop. Today's video is going to be all about making this floating shelf that I made for my wife to put in her hair salon. So stick around. So I'm going to begin by taking my piece of stock lumber. This is a piece of 2x8 that I got from the home center. You can actually have them cut this down to the length that you want in the store. That way it's a lot easier for you to transport. I know the price of wood is still a little bit high, but this is still relatively an inexpensive project that you can achieve really quickly. You're also going to want to make sure that when you're there at the home center, pick up some 1/2-inch dowel rod. You really only need about 2 feet of it, but I've got a couple little pieces extra just in case we wanted to make another one of these shelves. I've had this piece hanging around in my shop for a little while, and so I'm going to go ahead and use it up. It's actually a little wider than what we want to do. My wife wants it to be 6 inches deep, 24 inches wide. So what I'm going to do, we're going to just go ahead and mark it. I always like to put a straight edge line on there because when you go to cut it, it helps me know that my saw is nice and square. And then for the width, we're doing 6 inches. But one thing that you want to make sure, you don't want to just mark 6 inches. What we're going to end up doing is cutting this to our width, but then we're also going to come in about 1.5 inches and cut it again. When we cut that, we're going to remove the width of the saw blade. That's called the kerf. So the one that I'm going to be using is about 1/8 inch thick. So I want to measure to 6 and 1/8 inch so that when we cut it, it'll actually end up being 6 inches. Okay, so to cut this board, you don't really need to have a table saw or a miter saw. Really, the only saw that you truly would need would be a circular saw. I happen to have a cordless one here. I do have a corded one as well. You can use a circular saw by using the fence that would come with it, setting the depth to the depth that you want to do, and do the rip cut and the cross cut. I'm actually going to choose to use my miter saw and table saw because I have it in my shop. But like I said, you can totally do it with that. If you didn't have a power tool and you want to achieve this with a hand saw, by all means, go ahead. But if you're going to go that route, I would try to get stock lumber that's already the dimensions that you want to have it at, just to make it a little bit easier for you. So now with the board all cut, I'm going to clamp it to my workbench with the back side end up first. This will be the back that gets mounted against the wall. If you don't have a workbench, you can just freehand stand this up on its own, but I think this is just a little easier. So the next thing we're going to do, we're actually going to put dowels through this into the board. It's going to go in about 3 to 4 inches deep, but the back part it will be attached where the front will not be, and this front piece will slide on to the back piece. It'll actually make sense a little bit better later on, but for this we're going to go and measure. What I like to kind of do as a rule of thumb, this is 24 inches. I want to put 3 in them. So if you go with a 6 foot, do 6 of them. Just try to do at least 1 per foot. And of course, if you're doing a 1 foot, you want to put 2 in there. So we're going to put one dead center, one at 6 inches, one at 18 inches. Also going to mark the center of it. Do that on all 3 of them. The next thing we're going to do is drill these 3 holes. Now this part is not extremely critical that your hole is exactly perpendicular with the board. If it's a little bit of an angle, it's not a big deal as long as we keep the orientation of these correct. And once again, it'll make a little more sense later on. So take the dowel. I am using 1/2 inch dowel rod because I have a 1/2 inch drill bit. And what I'm going to do is drill down 4 inches. And to make sure that I don't overshoot it, take a little piece of tape. You can use clear tape. Take your ruler, measure down 4 inches. Put your piece of tape at the end of that 4-inch mark. And all that does is gives you a little flag. So as you drill down, this will give you an indication of where you need to stop drilling. the next step in this is determine which side you want to be the top. I have determined this will be the top. And so our next step is going to be measure in from the back, which is where the holes are. Measure in 1.5 inches. And I'm only going to put a line for reference for you and also for me, because I like to see, once again, where my cut's going to be. Now before we make this cut, we want to do one major critical thing. At this point, put a line that intersects the line we just did, because that will help determine, keep you square with your orientation, so that when we go to put these back together, we're not going to flip this and try to put it, and then the board is not going to turn out very straight. So then next we're going to go ahead and cut this either with your circular saw or your table saw, but you want to make sure that you have a nice clean cut. So we got our two pieces, and like I said, these little lines that we put in there keeps us from possibly doing this, keeps us from possibly doing this. It just makes sure and ensures that they will not have an issue when you go to mount this. But the next thing we want to do is put the dowels in. So for the dowel, we measured 4 inches in. But as a precaution, because we did this by hand, we're going to actually only do it 3 7/8, maybe even 3 3/4. And we're going to mark these. We're going to mark 3 of them out and then cut them off to length. Alright, we've got our 3 dowels. Now before we continue on to the next step, we want to give ourselves a little mark again. So for this, we're going to measure whatever we left here, which is what we ended up doing was 1.5 inches. I'm going to measure the same distance again, 1.5 inches from one end. And then here's a little trick. What we're going to want to do, that 1.5 inches is going to sit in this board, and we want that to be nice and stiff. As we can tell right now, it's a little loose, but once we put the glue in, it'll be great. We don't want it to be too stiff in the front board, because if it's too stiff in the front board, then we won't be able to slide this on. So to achieve a little bit of a less work on it, take your drill, and most drills will be able to do this because this is a 1/2 inch and this is the maximum it will take. Just tighten it on there just enough. Take a piece of sandpaper. I'm going to use 150 grit. You can set it on the bench. I prefer to just hold it there. Make sure you hold your sandpaper up to your line. Don't get too far. And then just give it a couple spins. And don't get too aggressive on it. And matter of fact, don't do it too much at all. Give it a test fit every once in a while. See, it's still a little bit too stiff. We're going to do it again. That's better. And just repeat the same on all the other ones. For our next step, we're going to go ahead and glue these dowels into the board, on the back board that is. And so we'll set the front one aside. Make sure you take the right side of your dowel and apply some glue to it. And then we'll get it in there. And before you let that dry, wipe off your excess glue. So a little tip that I've learned by doing this, before the glue sets up and after we just clean these off, put your boards lined up and line these up. What you want to do, push these in, being very careful and minded that the glue is not solid. And let's just go in as far as you can until you don't feel too much resistance, but you do not want to clamp this all the way down. The only thing that this is going to do, we're probably going to stop about a 1/4 inch away. This will allow the glue to set up perfect with each hole. If you let it set up and one's just a hair off, then you're going to end up trimming it off or having to trim the hole, and then it's just going to get kind of messy at that point. So now at this point, we'll just leave it set just like that. Alright, it's been about an hour. I'm going to go ahead and pull this off of there. So these are nice and solid now. So what we want to do now is turn this up on in. We're going to measure in from the sides where we want to put holes to mount this to the wall. Now typical walls have studs that are 16 inches on center, and you will want to mount these to that. So you're going to want to measure from your one hole to the other 16 inches on center so that you can make sure you're in the stud. So to find the stud in the wall, you could use a stud finder, or another method is you can use a magnet. And what that magnet is going to do, it'll actually locate where the screws are, and that's where your stud is going to be. But I'm putting this actually against a brick wall, so for me that really doesn't matter. So in this case, I'm going to come in from both sides 4 inches. So with this hole, I'm going to use an 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're going to go straight through to the back of the board. So when our screw goes in this hole, it's going to protrude out, and we do not want that because these are going to set flush. So you could use one of these countersink bits, and that's perfectly fine, but I want to go a little deeper. So what I'm going to do is use that 1/2 inch bit again that we used for the dowels, and just penetrate enough that it would hide a screw head. And then take your sandpaper we used before and just buff that nice and smooth. So a couple final steps in this project. We'll take our board, we're going to slide it all the way on. Our last step before we do any finishing is going to be this, and this is actually going to pretty much take care of having these notches disappear. We want to put a screw to lock these in place, and I prefer to put them on the top because most of the time you're not going to see the top, but you may see the bottom. You could always put this on the bottom if you think it's better for you, but just eyeball the center of that dowel and put a little mark. I'm just going to do it kind of lightly so I don't see it too much, and then go ahead and close it together. Alright, now we've got that tight, we're going to take our drill and that same 1/8 inch drill bit, drill about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch down into the wood. Now for this, I'm going to use this countersink chuck. Just to hide the screw a little bit. You can use a larger drill bit to achieve the same thing. Now with our set screw hole, we're going to give it a test fit here. I do this by hand so that you don't strip the wood out. And that will lock in. Alright, so I began by removing that set screw and just take your back off. For this, I'm just going to use some deck screws. This is something I have laying around. Don't mind that. That's from my being a craftsman sign. So you're going to want to find where you want this on the wall. In this case, for this example, right here. Okay. Throw a level on it. And like I said, this would be different if you're putting this on a drywall wall. You want to locate the studs and make sure that your holes line up with those studs using a stud finder or a magnet to find the screw heads. I've got a plain piece of wood back here, so it really doesn't matter. If I'm doing it on brick, I would use some masonry screws. We'll get our set screw started on the top of it. Then this slip right on those pegs. And then do your set screw. And there we have it. Nice, steady, floating shelf. Okay guys, so I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you really liked it, leave a comment down below and give me a thumbs up. This floating shelf has really turned out great. I think I'm probably going to end up making more of these because they were so simple to make and it's such a great look. So guys, thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next time right here in the workshop.